Book 1, Vader. It is a period of insurgence. Rebel spaceships, striking from a hidden base on a moon of Yavin, have won a shocking victory against the rightful reign of the Galactic Empire. The Empire's ultimate peacekeeping force, the Death Star, was destroyed due to an unforeseen design flaw. Without this deterrent, the rule of law is in danger. Chaos looms. For the 19 years after the vanquishing of the Jedi and his painful rebirth on volcanic Mustafar, Sith Lord Darth Vader has faithfully served his master. But now, he has failed the Emperor and must pay the price.
Hey Web World, Scotty D, thanks for stopping by to another in my comic book series here on my channel, and today we are talking Vader, the brand new Marvel Star Wars Darth Vader comic book series. I'm going to give you my thoughts, my first impressions, my review, if you will, on this brand new comic book series from Marvel, and you're not going to want to miss this one. There is a lot of information to talk about, some of it slightly controversial. Before we get started, if you want to write me an email, scott@scottydonline.com is the email account, and if you want to follow me over on Twitter, it's @scottydonline over there. Both of those are in the video description for easy find and easy use. And check this out. Marvel Star Wars #1. I know I've already done a review on this comic, but this one happens to be the second printing cover of this comic. See, right there. Second printing. Is it coming in clarity there? Is it coming into focus? Do we see it? Yeah, it's good enough. Anyways, it's a second printing. Why is that important? Why am I showing it to you? Well, for two reasons. One, I'm happy to have it because this thing was sold out before it even hit the stands of your LCSs across the world. The first printing sold so well, over 1 million copies, that people were already in the queue for the second printing before it even came out. I happen to have a fantastic LCS owner, Dave Bishop, over at Big Bang Comics and Collectibles. Thank you so much for going the extra mile and making sure that you were able to nab one of these up and stick it in my pull folder. Thank you so much. It is a treasure to have in my collection now. And this particular series, you need to understand this series because this series and that series are lockstepped together in their storylines. So you're going to want to get this in your pull or your subscriptions, however your LCS calls it, if you don't have it yet. If you bypassed on this to say, hey, I'm just going to get the Vader series, you're missing out on a whole separate element of the story being told. We're going to get into that in greater detail. So, second printing, so happy to have this one in my collection. This one right here is, make sure none of these fall over, this is Marvel's Darth Vader #1. This is the original cover. Now, back over here, I have two other covers. This one is the blank cover variant. I talked about blank cover variants on one of my previous videos. If you're not familiar with what a blank cover variant is or why you might want to have a blank cover variant, go back and check out, I believe, the Marvel Star Wars #1 review that I did on this particular series right here. I've done a review on #2 as well here on my channel. You can find that in the comic book playlist here on my channel. But this is the blank cover variant of Darth Vader's #1. This one happens to be from one of my favorite cover artists of all time. This is the Alex Ross variant cover of Star Wars Darth Vader #1. Take a look at the details on this. You'd probably think that that's a photograph. You probably would think that that's probably digitally created. And what you need to understand about Alex Ross art on covers is it starts as a painting and then ends up as the cover to a comic book. That is phenomenal. Seeing this on camera, I can tell you, does not do it justice. This is a phenomenal piece of artwork right here. And you know, I used to not be really excited about variant covers. I used to be like, it's the same story on the inside. Why are you buying a book just for the cover? And while the story inside is important, and I read it in this, the respect given to this artist or any of your favorite variant cover artists out there. Maybe it's not Alex Ross. Mine happens to be Alex Ross. Maybe you like some of the other cover artists for any of the comics that you collect. It's the respect that you're given to that artist for that work that they're doing to produce a specific variant cover. A phenomenal, phenomenal piece of artwork here. The Alex Ross Star Wars variant cover. So let's jump straight into this. You can see my bag is not sealed yet. Why is that? Well, I am now grading all of my comics in my collection. I've read this more than once. I haven't gone through and done a formal grading on it. I will do that post this video, and then I will seal it up in the back with my grading notes here in the back and the particular grade that I give it using the 4th edition Overstreet Guide to Grading Comics. I've done a full review on that guide as well. It's here on my channel in the comic book series playlist. So let's jump right into here. This one opens up just as familiar as the other Star Wars comics from Marvel so far. We see the very familiar scroll at the beginning of the comic, but this one also has a full 2-page logo of Star Wars Darth Vader. It's a very in-your-face, like, we're here to tell you this story, and you get that right from that logo, and I really, really appreciated that. And it's visually appealing to see that stretched across 2 pages. It's really, really, really cool. Then, of course, the scroll. And one thing I've noticed from these new Marvel Star Wars books that I feel is missing is a definitive place where it fits into the canonical timeline. You know, this was something that was available in many of the comics from Dark Horse just on page 1. So if you open up the page, the cover inside would be page 1. And they would have a timeline of where it where it fit into the storyline or the timeline of the Star Wars universe. And I appreciated that with Dark Horse. I'd love to see that being included on future releases of the Marvel Star Wars comic book series now that they now have the publishing rights. I'd love to see that included back in the comic. I feel it's missing here. Now, while they do say in this particular comic, right in the scroll, that it's taking place 19 years after the vanquishing of the Jedi that happened in Revenge of the Sith with Order 66 with Commander Cody. Remember that one? Now, if you know anything about the Star Wars timeline, A New Hope, which is episode 4 in the movie canonical timeline, A New Hope also falls 19 years in the timeline after Revenge of the Sith. So this story is happening immediately after A New Hope, which incidentally, the new Star Wars series is too. And that's why I showed this, because this one is also happening immediately after A New Hope. So now we have 2 storylines to pay attention to and keep in lockstep with each other, because they say things that are bouncing back and forth between the 2 comic book series. So that's why I showed that one earlier. You now know why I was showing you the Star Wars when we're talking about Vader, because they are both happening at the same timeline in parallel. So that said, keep a close eye on the 2 storylines, and I'm talking about Vader and Star Wars, to make sure that Disney, Marvel, Star Wars, however you're correlating them together as a single entity, don't step on their own toes, because we've seen them already do this in book 1 and 2 of Star Wars. Let me explain for a second, because you're probably like, I'm a little confused. What are you talking about? Well, when Disney bought Star Wars, they banished the EU to what is now known as legend. They're saying it may have happened, it may not have happened, but it certainly is not canonical. That said, now I want you to keep a close eye on these 2 storylines. I'm talking about Vader and Star Wars. because we're going to want to pay close attention to Disney, Marvel, Star Wars, however you're correlating them as being a single entity, to make sure that they're not going to be stepping on their own toes, because we've already seen this in book 1 and 2 of Star Wars. Let me explain for a second, because I know you're going, wait a minute. They didn't step on their toes. They kind of did. You see, because when Disney bought Star Wars, they banished the expanded universe to nothing more than legend. They say it may have happened, but it may not have happened. But one thing's for sure, it's not canonical. They said that. And we see things in this book right here that say otherwise in their opinion of the EU. Let me explain a little bit further. There are 2 books in the legend arena as we know it now. One is called Splinter of the Mind's Eye. Now, it was published in 1978 and was the first Star Wars novel published after the movie A New Hope. Now, elements in this book were approved by George Lucas himself. Therefore, we can argue that this particular book is canon. But Disney considers it legend. Now, interestingly, in this book, Splinter of the Mind's Eye, it's set between A New Hope and Empire Strikes Back. Now, Luke and Leia, in this particular book, Splinter of the Mind's Eye, also meet Vader for the first time on a strange swamp location, similar to the movie appearance on Dagobah, where Luke meets Vader in a vision. Remember that? Where he is training underneath Yoda. He's in a cave. The shadowy figure of Vader comes up. Luke swipes his saber. The helmet of Vader falls off. It explodes. And inside of that is a face of Luke. So we, at that very point, start to tie Luke and Vader together, going, maybe there's some sort of a tie to these 2 individuals in the storyline. So, the second is a comic series from Dark Horse called Vader's Quest, published in 1999, where Vader also meets up with Luke. And I bring this up because of 2 things. Some of the brand new Star Wars fans who are not as familiar with the EU are upset that Vader is meeting up with Luke so soon. They're saying that it hasn't happened yet, when in fact it has in the EU. And I've given you 2 examples of where it was published. And one of those was approved by Lucas. And secondly, because Disney said the EU doesn't exist and is a mere legend. But it's crystal clear to me that the writers of the new Star Wars Darth Vader series from Marvel and the Marvel Star Wars series are getting inspiration from the EU and putting that in their comics. And now that Disney owns Marvel, Disney is making all of their comics canon under their regime, which ultimately is a slap in the face to the entire EU. For my fellow Star Wars fans who are big, hardcore EU fans, you know what I'm talking about here. For those of you who don't know what I'm talking about, you need to go back and read some of the expanded universe. Because I guarantee that we're going to see it show up more in these comic series, the pending Leia series, and it'll be interesting with the new Kanan series, which is also coming up in a little bit, to see if anything shows up there as well. It's just those things that make you go, You know, if you're looking at it from a holistic approach, the Star Wars universe, things like that make you go, Unbelievable. I digress. On to my review. And I know I got a little long-winded there, but I felt it necessary to talk about some elements that I felt stood out, so obvious to me. Especially now that Disney's saying, this is canon, that's canon, Leia is canon, the Kanan series is canon, but there are pieces from what they call the legend showing up. We find ourselves at the very beginning of this book at Jabba's palace. I loved how they drew this out. It was very accurately drawn. The Gamorrean guards at the ready at the door. A quick swish of the lightsaber, and then they're no more. And then the shadowy figure of Vader moves through the corridors with ease. and panic sets in with a very familiar face, Bib Fortuna, and the obvious antics of Jabba the Hutt. Then there's a verbal altercation between Jabba and Darth, where Vader says to Hutt that mind tricks aren't the way of the Sith. Force is. Really? Now, I agree. Darth Vader uses Force a lot. But one can argue in the earlier days when Anakin was making his transition to the dark side and becoming a Sith Lord, that he was using the Force in a negative way and, dare I say, using mind tricks to get what he wanted. I'm just saying. That's my perception. You can differ yours. I'd love to see your comments below. I'm just saying. Then there's a really cool piece of artwork here where Vader's standing in front of Hutt with the bounty hunters and Hutt's entourage behind him. Vader is drawn so much better in this book to the accompanying Marvel Star Wars #2 running in parallel in the canon time frame. I'm talking about this one right here. I talked about my dissatisfaction to how Vader looked in this book. How he looks smushed and just not proportionally right. That's this particular cell that I'm talking about, where he's standing in front of Hutt and the bounty hunters and the entourage behind him. Very, very cool. Arguably one of my favorite cells in this book right here. And I like that Vader's trip in this particular book is personal and nothing to do with the Empire. This is very accurate to the mindset of Anakin being selfish, doing what he wants first. Because remember, this is really soon after Anakin was put into the suit and became Vader. So he's still angry. He's still inside that selfish, that arrogant person who's not yet tuned himself to be in control of himself and the Force. And this story has a quick saber versus Jabba and his entourage. It's fast action. It's very cool. You can hear the buzz of the lightsaber in your imagination while it plays out on the cells in this comic book. Very, very fast. And much like any Star Wars story, the cutscenes are great. I really enjoyed the cutscenes in this. It helps to frame the intentions of the story from where the writer is to help better set up the next moment in the story. And this is where we as readers now get the connection between this Vader series and the new Marvel Star Wars series. Because I said, you've got to get both of these in your pull. Because if you don't, you're going to be missing out on elements between the two storylines. Because I guarantee that they're going to continue to run in parallel. At least I hope. I can't guarantee anything. I'm not writing these books. But I hope that we're going to see more of these in parallel. It makes it fun to read the two series in conjunction with each other. And the reader, while they're getting their connection, they also have to keep in mind the elements of this story are going to be a little different from everything else in the other stories because it's a different parallel storyline. It's as if you're watching a movie that has both of these storylines in it as a single movie, but then they jump, and then they jump, and then they jump, and then they jump. It's not that sporadic, but you definitely do need to pay attention to both of the storylines. The Emperor has very little faith in Vader in this book. You remember, Vader's still new, and he's failed miserably with the Death Star destruction. And now, with this assault on Psi Moon 1 that we've seen in the original series back here, Marvel Star Wars, where Psi Moon 1 is being attacked by Han and Leia and Luke and let's see, C-3PO's in that, and it's just a great storyline. But he's failed with the destruction of the Death Star. He's failed on Psi Moon 1, and so now the Emperor sends Vader on a mission to Tatooine, which I like because it's another tie-in to the canon of A New Hope. So I really did appreciate that. And before Vader leaves, there's a strange character with the Emperor that, in my humble opinion, looks a lot like John Travolta. What do you think? Take a look at that. I don't care. It looks like John Travolta to me. What the French toast? What do you think? Comment below. I'd love to hear your thoughts on what you think of that character. And the Emperor asks Vader a question. And there's a flashback in Vader's mind in this particular comic book. In Vader's mind, where it's a pivotal scene from A New Hope. And book number 1 and 2 from the new Star Wars comic series. And while you're seeing this flashback take place, you know, the answer from Vader to the Emperor is nothing, and he says some other, key words. Now, don't you think that if the Emperor was that strong with the dark side of the Force, that he would be able to see through Vader that he was lying here? They better fix that quick. I'm just saying that it's not going to fly with hardcore fans. What do you think? Comment below. The next section of this book is where Vader meets up with Fett as the hired bounty hunter from Jabba the Hutt to find and capture Luke Skywalker, which would appear by the writing in this book to be the first time that Fett and Vader are meeting. There just seems to be that feeling in the writing. Maybe it's not the writer's intentions, but it's how I took it. What do you think? Comment below. And it's another example, in my opinion, on how Disney banishing the EU into what is now legend isn't holding true. Because the writers obviously were inspired again by the EU in the writing of this story. Because shortly after Yavin, Vader hired Fett to go after an Imperial deserter called Abal Karta. And then Fett was hired again by Vader to take out Starkiller, who was a clone of Vader's former apprentice Galen Marek. And Fett was hired numerous times in the EU storyline by Vader, to the point that Vader grew to have a certain respect for the bounty hunter's abilities and capabilities. They even fought each other. And in that battle between Vader against Fett, Vader won, but barely. That shows the true abilities of Boba Fett. And that happened well before this. So for Vader to be disappointed, it seemed a little off storyline from the character and what we know. I know the EU is now legend, but when it comes in this story and it's now canon, you have to question it. You have to. I'd love to see your comments below on this. Unbelievable. Closing out this book, we prepare for Vader number 2 later on this month, and there's artwork where Vader says his present business is concluded. It is a great, powerful cell of artwork and very well illustrated, very powerful. I'm not going to spoil it for you too much. It's probably my second favorite artwork cell in this comic. The next issue is set to be released February 25th, 2015. Make sure you get it in your pull list at your LCS. I got to tell you, I enjoy reading these. I love having them in my collection. I am thankful that they're canon, but those pieces and elements that I've gave examples of that are clearly being extracted from the EU and presented in the new books, it left me both frustrated and elated at the same time. I was happy that the writers are obviously inspired by the EU, but frustrated at Disney saying the EU is nothing more than canon, or not canon anymore, legend. Don't get me wrong, there are a lot of stories in what is now legend that are just absolutely not believable. But when we're seeing elements show up in the new canon comics, man, it gets your blood boiling just a little bit. You got to agree with me. I hope you liked this review. Please give it a thumbs up. Share it with somebody that you know. If you haven't yet subscribed to my channel, please do so. If you already are subscribed to my channel, thank you so very, very much. And if you want to write me an email, it's real simple to do so. Scott@ScottyDOnline.com. The Twitter account is @ScottyDOnline. If you want to become more than a channel subscriber and kick it up a notch, you can become a channel patron. Patreon.com/ScottyDOnline. And if you're a hardcore comic book fan, collector, and you want to hang out with people that are like-minded like you, come on over and join the Comic Book Curator group on Facebook. The link is in the video description below. So until the next comic book series video, we'll see you next time, Web World. May the Force be with you.